Morning. This morning, I'm going to start with a reading from the Pali Canon, one of the suttas called the Andakavinda Sutta. Andakavinda is the name of a place in the ancient Buddhist world. So if you would put your hands on hot chunks. On one occasion, the Blessed One was staying among the Magadhans at Andakavinda. Then Venerable Ananda went to him, and having bowed down to him, sat to one side. As he was sitting there, the Blessed One said to him, Ananda, the new monks, those who have not gone forth, who are newcomers in the Dhamma and discipline, should be encouraged, exhorted, and established in these 5 things. Which 5? Come, friends, be virtuous, dwell restrained in accordance with the Patimokkha, the basic rules, complete in your behavior and sphere of activity. Train yourselves, having undertaken the training rules, seeing danger in the slightest faults. Thus, they should be encouraged, exhorted, and established in restraint in accordance with the Patimokkha. Come, friends, dwell with your sense faculties guarded, with mindfulness as your protector, with mindfulness as your chief, with your intellect self-protected, endowed with an awareness protected by mindfulness. Thus, they should be encouraged, exhorted, and established in restraint of the senses. Come, friends, speak only a little. Place limits on your conversation. Thus, they should be encouraged, exhorted, and established in limited conversation. Come, friends, dwell in the wilderness. Resort to remote wilderness and forest dwellings. Thus, they should be encouraged, exhorted, and established in physical seclusion. Come, friends, develop right view. Be endowed with right vision. Thus, they should be encouraged, exhorted, and established in right vision. New monks, those who have not gone long forth, who are newcomers in this Dhamma and discipline, should be encouraged, exhorted, and established in these 5 things. So ends the reading. So the part of that I want to focus on today is this one of the 5 things. Dwell in the wilderness. Resort to remote wilderness and forest dwellings. And I have a few reasons for choosing that one instruction today, which I'll get into throughout the talk a little bit, and you'll see the reasons why I want to talk about that. But you might be curious, why is this one of the Buddha's instructions to go out into the wilderness, to go out into the forest? And interestingly, there's probably at least 6, if not more, good reasons to go out into the wilderness. And through the various texts and teachings and sutras, we can kind of extrapolate or derive a lot of these different reasons. As you heard in that reading, seclusion, right? Physical seclusion, viveka, radically supports meditation. Right? Going out, you have fewer kind of stimulus and sense inputs and distractions or social kind of pulls and obligations when you're out in nature somewhere, making it easier to steady one's attention and to cultivate concentration and samadhi. Another reason is that forest life trains, quote, fewness of wishes and contentment. So the Buddha explicitly urges new monks to go out into the wilderness and establish themselves there. And this is praised as foremost for cultivating few desires and living a lean, sustainable way of life. If you don't have much around you, there's not much to tempt you in some ways, right? Going out in nature can foster mental qualities, positive and conducive mental qualities. when asked, the Buddha was asked, why do the forest monks look so radiant? They're almost like kind of have this special aura and glow. And the Buddha answered that, well, they don't cling to the past or chase after the future. Their minds are present, and they kind of have this, was a resting forest face, you could say. Also, incubating deep meditation and fearless composure. So there's many scenes in different texts where a lot of monks talk about really how scary and dangerous the forest could be. And if you imagine some 2,500 or 3,000 years ago, maybe even more dangerous than it is now in some areas. So being able to face your fears, right? To go to places that scare you as a ground of training. And there's lots of different ways you can kind of take that lesson to mind and heart, but intentionally seeking out those difficult environments as a kind of training ground. That solitude, in a way, can help to deforest the mind, right? To cut through the inner tangles. And there's lots of different metaphors and analogies and similes that are used all throughout Buddha's teachings and writings, which I'll share some of those a bit later too. But when challenged about, the Buddha was questioned, why do we have to go out, into the forest, into the wilderness, to do this spiritual work? And the Buddha replied kind of in a metaphor, a simile, that he's cut down the inner forest of restlessness at the roots and delights in this aloneness. So linking this outer seclusion with inner untangling is one way we could put it. And then basically aligning the practice of emptiness in kind of wide space, and refining that perception to more and more open, unoccupied awareness, right? So when we move out of, in our modern context, away from the roads and buildings and cars and noise and TV and everything else, we create and open up kind of more space of awareness. So put simply, the forest recommended not as an escape, but as a skillful environment, right? A destination to stabilize attention, shrink craving, and spacious enough to meet fear and see clearly. And a lot of the arhats or arhats, the enlightened monks, right, write about this in the Therigatha, this collection of poems about monks talking about their spiritual life and their practice. One of the monks, Vakali, is quoted as saying this. He says, "Stricken by sharp, wind-like pains, you monk living in the forest grove, harsh with limited range for alms, what will you do? Suffusing my body with abundant rapture and joy, and enduring what's harsh, I'll stay in the grove. Developing the frame of reference, strengths, faculties, the factors for awakening, I'll stay in the grove. Reflecting on those who are resolute, their persistence aroused, constantly firm in their efforts, united in concord, I'll stay in the grove. Recollecting the one self-awakened, self-tamed and centered, untiring both day and night, I'll stay in the grove." So there's many such of these poems and recollections about monks praising kind of the benefits of this forest living. And we'll remember too, the Buddha's own awakening experience happened out of doors in the wilderness, right? Under the Bodhi tree, one of the foremost and perennial symbols in Buddhist practice. In one of the core sutras called the Noble Search, where the Buddha's talking about his own spiritual journey, he tells his disciples, "Seeking the supreme state of sublime peace, I wandered until I saw a delightful stretch of land and a lovely woodland grove, and a clear flowing river with a delightful forest. So I sat down thinking, indeed, this is an appropriate place to strive for the ultimate realization of nirvana." And then part of that story too. When the Buddha is about to have this experience, right? He chooses the earth, the ground nature, to be his witness to his awakening when he reaches down and touches the earth, captured in this famous mudra, this gesture that you see in the statue up here on the altar. You see his right hand reaching down to touch the earth. Right? So this integration with nature, that awakening isn't an escape from the world itself is part of that experience and testifies to that. One of the great disciples, and actually the first patriarch in the Buddhist tradition, the lineage after the Buddha, is Mahakashapa, the great elder disciple of the Buddha, famous for his forest practice or his extreme austere practice, also called Dhutanga, which is an extra kind of set of rules and practices that are more kind of restricted than what some of the other monks would follow, wearing like old ragged robes, not taking invitations to from rich patrons to eat in their houses and towns and things like that, but stayed in the forest. In Mahakashapa, in the Zen tradition, we talk about that passing on, that transmission, that the Buddha holds up this flower, doesn't say anything, but it's Mahakashapa that understands the teaching and smiles and becomes the kind of spiritual successor in some ways to the Buddhist Sangha. So really important in the tradition, around the flower servant and all these things. And also interestingly, I remembered or learned in putting these notes together, Mahakashapa is the only monk that ever exchanged robes with the Buddha. The only one. And part of that story goes, they were walking somewhere and the Buddha wanted to rest and sit down. Mahakashapa took off his robes, folded them up to make a cushion for the Buddha, and in exchange, the Buddha gave him his robes, which were the old tattered rags from the charnel grounds, and that was kind of the unspoken kind of symbol or invitation to start this Dhutanga, this extreme forest practice. So he kind of inherited that from the Buddha. Which I think is really, really interesting part of the history and story. But Mahakashapa also has a poem in the Therigatha. So if you're ever searching for like about Buddhism and nature and that kind of connection, you're likely to come upon Mahakashapa and his words from the Therigatha, which he says this: "Strung with garlands of flowering vines, this patch of earth delights the mind. The lovely calls of elephant sound, these rocky mountains do please me so. The shimmering hue of darkening clouds, cool waters and pure streams flowing, enveloped by Indra's ladybugs, these rocky mountains do please me so. Like the lofty peaks of looming clouds, like the most refined of palaces, the lovely calls of Tusker sounds, these rocky mountains do please me so. The lovely ground is rained upon, the hills are full of holy seers, resounding with the cry of peacocks, these rocky mountains do please me so. Being clothed in flaxen flowers, as the sky is covered in clouds, strewn with flocks of various birds, these rocky mountains do please me so. Not occupied by village folk, but visited by herds of deer, strewn with flocks of various birds, these rocky mountains do please me so. With clear waters and broad boulders, holding troops of monkey and deer, covered with moist carpets of moss, these rocky mountains do please me so. But there is not so much contentment for me in the fivefold music as in truly seeing Dhamma with a well-concentrated mind." The words of Mahakashapa. So throughout the Pali Canon, this idea that wilderness and nature are praised over and over again as a conducive environment for practice, and is often prescribed in the beginnings of many meditation instructions, such as the foundational Satipatthana Sutta, the foundations of mindfulness. If you remember that sutta, and I referenced it a few weeks ago, a different section of it, but it starts off before we even talk about mindfulness and how to do that and paying attention to the body and the breath and all of that. The first thing the Buddha says is, how do you live contemplating the body in the body? Here in a monk, having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree or to an empty place, sit down with your legs crossed, keeping your body erect and your mindfulness alert. So the first thing he says is where to practice mindfulness, where to go and where to do this. So, it's no wonder that, over the centuries, that Buddhism has continued to be strongly tied to nature. And if you look at many of the great monasteries and temples of various traditions, secluded and situated out of the cities, out of the towns, in the mountains, our own Sunim Sa, our training monastery, deep in the mountains. Other famous temples, some I visited, like Eiheiji, the head of the Soto Zen sect in Japan, deep in the mountains. You can probably seen pictures or on TV and movies of all these retreat centers and temples, really, really secluded there, right? In the turn of the 20th century, the forest tradition kind of got reinvigorated in Thailand, which influenced some of the early Western practitioners that went over to Asia to learn about Buddhism. So, they learned about that over there from teachers like Ajahn Chah, who one of the great Thai forest monks, who says things like, the forest is peaceful. Why aren't you? Let nature teach you. Hear the bird's song, then let go. If you know nature, you'll know the Dharma. Or Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, another Thai forest monk, says, nature is the teacher. Everything in nature is Dhamma. If we study it carefully, we will understand Dhamma. Right? So this integration with the natural world really deeply embedded in practice. And we see that amongst all the metaphors and similes and analogies we have. I had my handy friend, ChatGPT, help me out and read the entire Dhammapada and, find all the different collections of places where nature is kind of referenced, metaphors, right? So I didn't fact check it, but I know enough of the Dhammapada that I think it's pretty close. It's pretty close, right? And there's probably somewhere around, give or take, 83 distinct natural metaphors just in the Dhammapada itself that, cover lots of categories about trees and plants and flowers, waters, rivers, ocean, animals, birds, earth, mountains, fire, wind, weather, rain, agriculture, parallels with the human body and nature parallels. There's almost any verse you could pick out of the Dhammapada, or any chapter, there's some metaphor or analogy using the natural world to understand ourselves and the world and our mind. So next time you're, studying or reading the Dhammapada, pay attention and look at and sit on those nature metaphors for a little bit and see how they resonate. We still use a lot of that symbolism. You look up and see the lotus lanterns we have up on the ceiling, right? Another natural metaphor in the name of our temple, Muddy Water Zen, right? A natural metaphor of where you have something really pure and this lotus, the symbol of awakening enlightenment, grows in the muddy, swampy water, right? So these metaphors and imagery are all around us. So, having, known that we have so many of these kind of things to help remind us and connect to, part of why I'm doing this talk today is for a few reasons, but one of the things I did for the hospital, me and my colleague Bridget, who's one of our Catholic chaplains, we put together. We were asked to kind of think about ways to help hospital clinicians and leaders kind of do something for their well-being, like a wellness, resilience kind of thing. And we were really tired and burnt out of like another lecture or another webinar or another kind of classroom kind of thing, right? To tell us how we should take care of ourselves and things like that, right? So he said, you know what, we're going to do something different. We're going to design a kind of half-day retreat and take people outside, out of their work environments, out of the building, um, and do something there. So we actually had our first retreat this past Thursday. There's a park up by my house in Auburn Hills that has a really beautiful lodge there and easily accessible trails around a little pond up in Hawk Woods area, right off of Bald Mountain Road, if you know that area. So we did this retreat. We put together like a little workbook and put together a bunch of stuff, like different quotes about nature, but also we use some of the natural scenery along the trail, whether it's big old trees, the pond itself. There's little both natural bridges and man-made bridges and creeks and open space and all different kinds of things that we use as kind of invitations to stop and reflect and use the metaphors along the trail as kind of the invitation to reflect and think about one's own values and identity and purpose. And we had 20 people come out, supervisors and managers and directors and such from our rehabilitation outpatient group. And they had a really great time. And looking at that feedback that they shared with us, they said their emotional mood and their energy all increased from doing that. And we're just saying how much they love getting out of the hospital and out of the office and doing something like that. So it's something we hope to continue to do with other groups. And if you're curious or you want to go to that trail, I can share some of the stations that we created if you're curious about that. So in addition to all these spiritual benefits, right, that we can tap into in nature, there's also real health benefits, physical and mental benefits to it. And another reason that I kind of got interested to design this outdoor retreat too. I shared a few months ago how I kind of started some different health and fitness practices, and one of the things I've been doing is spending more time outside, hiking and rucking and things like that. So there's lots of benefits to getting outside, and maybe some of you have heard of the term forest bathing before. It's been around a while. It actually originated in Japan in the early 80s when actually the secretary of the forest agency, so go figure, they had an agenda, right, to get people outside to the parks and things like that, right? But noticing how much stress and really challenging thing comes from urban living and city living, especially in a big place like Japan and Tokyo, the biggest city on earth, right? And there's other research that shows like nowadays across kind of industrialized countries, on average, we spend about 93% of our lives indoors, whether in buildings or cars, and less time outside. And there's another study that just came out a few weeks ago, published in a English paper, that as humans, our contact and time, our kind of time in nature has decreased 60% in the last 200 years. So it gave this really stark warning that, if we don't kind of get back out there and preserve it and steward it, we're risking, and we know all the things with, climate change and all the, kind of impacts on the environment, that this relationship that we have with nature is pretty fragile and fraught right now. So forest bathing came about in the early 80s. that just kind of encourage people to spend time outside. You don't really even need to do anything, just be there, right? He's not talking about like, walking around town in an urban place, but going out to, a wooded area, forest, something like that. Not for exercise or not for anything, but just to be kind of like the forest monks. We're just dwelling in the forest, right? So lots of research and studies that have come out about how good this is for us. Physical benefits include lowering blood pressure, reducing heart rate, cardiovascular strain, can boost our immune system, has anti-cancer benefits, lowers inflammation, improves sleep, enhances respiratory health, reduces cortisol, aids in recovery, quicker recovery from illness and surgery and fatigue, improves balance and mobility, and all these benefits. That's just the physical benefits. The mental and emotional benefits, also reducing stress, anxiety, depression, improves mood and emotional regulation, increases attention, focus, and memory, enhances creativity and problem solving, and the list just goes on and on. So it's really good to be outside, right? So there's the spiritual benefits, there's the physical, the mental benefits. There's also importantly for us too, the moral and ethical benefits and connection there. So if any of you were here a few weeks ago when Reverend Daejong down from Belmont Zen Center in Ohio was here, his talk was all about Indra's jewel net, essentially this interconnection of how everything is connected. And connected to that, right? This is another prism or another facet in that jeweled net, right? Of how we connect with everything. And the late John Dido Laurie, a Zen master out of the Zen Mountain Monastery in upstate New York, talked about this too. He said, the diamond net of Indra is a description of the universe in which all things have a mutual identity, an interdependent origination. When one thing arises, all things arise simultaneously. Everything in this net has a mutual causality. What happens to one thing happens to the entire universe. It's a self-creating, self-maintaining, and self-defining organism, a universe in which all of its parts in totality are a single entity. So that's what Reverend Daejong talked about. And here he brings in the, aligns us to think about nature here too. He says, this is not some kind of holistic hypothesis or idealistic dream. It's your life. It's my life. The life of the mountain, the river, a blade of grass. These things are not related to each other. They are not part of the same thing. They are not similar. They are identical. What kind of world would this be if our appreciation and activity were based on this kind of non-duality? So that's what another way to think about kind of our also responsibility and how we steward and help to protect these spaces that are so vital for all of life, and how it is identical to our life. So the last thing I want to end with is maybe what some say is the first American sutra, possibly, written by Gary Snyder, one of the kind of part of the Beat generation, American poet, lecturer, environmental activist, wrote a lot on Buddhism and nature. He's been described as the poet laureate of deep ecology and a Pulitzer Prize winner for poetry. He wrote the Smokey the Bear Sutra in 1969, which presents kind of environmental concerns in the form of a Buddhist sutra and depicts Smokey the Bear as a reincarnation of Vairocana Buddha. So we'll close out with this new sutra called Smokey the Bear Sutra. Once in the Jurassic, about 150 million years ago, the great Sun Buddha in this corner of the infinite void gave a discourse to all the assembled elements and energies, to the standing beings, the walking beings, the flying beings, and the sitting beings, even the grasses to the number of 13 billion, each one born from a seed, assembled there, a discourse concerning enlightenment on the planet Earth. In some future time, there will be a continent called America. It will have great centers of power called such as Pyramid Lake, Walden Pond, Mount Rainier, Big Sur, Everglades, and so forth. The powerful nerves and channels such as Columbia River, Mississippi River, and Grand Canyon. The human race in that era will get into troubles all over its head and practically wreck everything in spite of its own strong, intelligent Buddha nature. The twisting strata of the great mountains and the pulsing of volcanoes are my love burning deep in the earth. My obstinate compassion is schist and basalt and granite, to be mountains to bring down the rain. In that future American era, I shall enter a new form to cure the world of loveless knowledge that seeks with blind hunger and mindless rage eating food that will not fill it. And he showed himself in his true form of Smokey the Bear. A handsome, smoky-colored brown bear standing on his hind legs, showing that he is aroused and watchful, bearing in his right paw the shovel that digs to the truth beneath appearances, cuts the roots of useless attachments, and flings damp sand on the fires of greed and war. His left paw in the mudra of camaraderie display, indicating that all creatures have the full right to live their limits and that of deer, rabbits, chipmunks, snakes, dandelions, and lizards all grow in the realm of the Dharma. Wearing the blue work overalls symbolic of slaves and laborers, the countless men oppressed by a civilization that claims to save but often destroys. Wearing the broad-brimmed hat of the West, symbolic of the forces that guard the wilderness, which is the natural state of the Dharma and the true path of man on earth. All true paths lead through mountains. With a halo of smoke and flame behind, the forest fires of the Kali Yuga, fires caused by the stupidity of those who think things can be gained and lost, whereas in truth, all is contained vast and free in the blue sky and green earth of one mind. Round-bellied to show his kind nature, and that the great earth has food enough for everyone who loves her and trusts her. Trampling underfoot wasteful freeways and needless suburbs, smashing the worms of capitalism and totalitarianism, indicating the task, his followers becoming free of cars, houses, canned foods, universities, and shoes, master the three mysteries of their own body, speech, and mind, and fearlessly chop down the rotten trees and prune out the sick limbs of this country, America, and then burn the leftover trash. Wrathful but calm, austere but comic, Smokey the Bear will illuminate those who would help him, but for those who would hinder or slander him, he will put them out. Thus his great mantra,